Welcome back to another template design video, and today we're going to look at our very first of the template par 3s, and for my money the best of the template par 3s, and that's the Eden. Now it used to be a mid-range par 3 which was around 160 to 180 yards, so many courses have lengthened this, and in game you may find they play 180 to 200 odd yards. So designed to test a player's mid-iron game and really distance control. It's quite specific with some of the bunkers that you use if you want to go for a really faithful rendition. But we're going to look at what the key concept of the hole is, why it's so good for quite a simple concept, and how you might employ this, as well as some spins that you might see on the design. Hope you enjoy. So here we're looking at the 17th at Fairyland, which was Joe's major design course. As you can tell from my score, it's pretty hard, particularly when you're speed playing, to get through to this hole. And you'll see immediately it is that mid-range, exactly as we'd kind of predict, around that 180 to 200 yard range. So you're already testing a player's distance control. Now, in terms of the bunkers, this is based on the, I think, high hole at St Andrews. So it was, I want to say the 14th, but I'm not entirely certain. 10th, maybe. And there are three very specific bunkers, or four, depending on how you look at it. You have the hill bunker, that's this one on the left, which protects that side. You have the Strath, which is a pot that is just short, because these are mimicking those bunkers at St Andrews. There was typically a Cockle or a Shelley which was short right, I believe. That may be what this one's fulfilling. And then there's an Eden bunker which is behind the green. And that one in this case has been replaced by a fall off. So what's the shot value we're really testing, and how are we testing it? Well, with this one it's very much distance control. And the way that's tested is really subtle and maybe not very obvious until you've got yourself caught out of position a couple of times. You've got to leave the ball below the hole. The green slopes very hard from back, so if we look at it, we'll go with 5-6 feet up at the moment, to front, where it's like 2, 1, and dropping in fact all the way off the front. So you've got a really hard back to front slope, and that's great because it can stop the ball quickly. But the moment you're above the flag, you are then facing a nightmarish downhill putt, which often can even run off the green or well past the hole. And putts from above the hole on the Eden are typically the hardest putts you'll face on the course. So, really simple concept, and you'll see there's a lot of red kind of coming back towards the pin. So therefore, it becomes a question of, do you take on this nasty bunker that you're probably not making up and down from in order to get close to this pin? You do have a tiny backstop which is going to reward the very perfect shot landing just here, and in actual fact with this one, I think if I remember rightly, you can kind of run it off this slope and have it come relatively close. But if you don't quite make that, the way he's contoured the green is just really mean, because if you're putting from this side, you're then putting dead towards that swale, which is going to run the ball right the way off. So you have to have a really treacherous little putt. And looking at the contours on the screen, you can see just where you didn't want to miss it. If you're missing it on this side, you probably got a slightly easier putt to keep it on the green, but it's definitely not an easy par 3. So we'll have a quick play of this one. It's a relatively stereotypical one. As said, if you go long of this green, chasing the back pins, that runoff behind is absolute death on this hole. It's just a really nasty par 3. Joe's done some great interpretations that we're going to look at. We'll give this one a go and see if we can better our score of 4 over. So I think that's going to be long and left. Might get a little bit of help from the slope, but to be honest, it's not as long as I thought. So now we'll start seeing that even though we've got the distance control about right, because of the slope of the green, we're going to end up with this really hard left to right putt, and even that becomes problematic. So what we've done is we've just put a huge amount of pressure on that tee shot, and the moment it's not perfect, or I mean it depends how difficult you want to make the hole, but the moment it's a little bit too far. So let's see if we push this putt just a touch too far. That one's gone way too far, but you'll see what happens to the ball. And the same would have happened if we'd just trickled the ball a tiny bit past, because that slope makes it very, very difficult to manage. So there's your Eden green in a nutshell. We're going to look at a couple of different spins on this and versions. So now looking at the Eden at Raynor Ridge, which is quickly becoming one of our go-to courses for this series, and you can see that first of all the green is huge, and that's with good reason, because the green itself is really the main defence on this hole. There's a lot of big slopes and they are consistently long slopes. So you've got 2 feet of elevation change from the pin back to the front, and that's what, 173 down to, yeah, so about 20 yards and 2 feet. So that's quite a severe slope. You've also got a big right to left slope which characterises this one, and a swale at the back that makes those back Eden bunkers play a little bit bigger. Obviously the ball's not going to run off into them, but the back part of the green becomes a bit more of the hazard as well. So and that's going to encourage you again to leave the ball below the hole. Now for this one, for this pin, you want to be thinking about leaving it somewhere around about here, and then you've got an uphill putt. So it's still not necessarily going flag hunting, because if you do go flag hunting and you land it here and go slightly too long and right and left even, well, you're facing a really dicey downhill putt, and getting it up and down is not necessarily guaranteed. The other thing I think is worth mentioning with Edens is, as the name suggests, like allusions to paradise and all of that, it's often put in a really pretty spot on the property, and this one's no exception. So we'll have a little quick go at this and see how that goes. I'm worried this might be slightly too much club, but if it is, then oh, the wind has killed that. So we've definitely got an uphill putt. The wind's made this difficult. That swale has taken it. So actually, that's leaving us at least a pretty straight uphill putt, I would think, with some slope. So you can really, even on a very big green, you can decide how aggressive you want to be by those big slopes. So yeah, another really good example. As you can see, you've got all the bunkering present that you would expect. So hill over to the left, strath, short and right, and then these 2 bunkers kind of comprising the Eden as well. And it's on this lovely plateau that just looks great. We're now going to look at 5 at Charleston Hall, which is a spin on the Eden. You can tell there's still the characteristics there. You've got your bunkering, you've got the very hard back to front green, which is a feature. I mean, there's barely any green slopes on it. And whilst you don't have a back bunker, you do have a runoff, and you'd end up in heavy rough trying to chip back down this green. So that's a very effective hazard, even just by not being fairway. So what makes this a little bit of a twist is the green slopes and this big spine in the back of the green, which can be used to help as like a kicker slope. If the pin's here, say, well, you're looking at landing and using this as a backstop. If it's up here, you might want to use it to play, kind of hedge your bets a little bit, play a little left of the pin and the slopes will bring it back round. Here we can go a little bit right of it and we're going to be filtered back towards it. But then there's also this little false front that's going to make you think. So imagine a pin positions here, you don't want to be short and left, long and right will be difficult, because as ever it's the same concept, you don't want to be putting downhill on these greens. So we always want to be leaving the ball below the hole. And I think these 2 big green features work really nicely in harmony, and you can see, although there's still the one concept, it gives you some really interesting pin positions. If you're here, let's say there's a pin here, well, we're really trying to land it short, and short and off the green is going to be way better than 5 feet past. Back here, this false front's not really coming into play, I wouldn't say. Here it would do. Back here you're looking at the spine. So it's still that one simple concept, and basically that question, which I think is great on a mid-iron, long iron approach, of can you be precise with your distance control. So let's see how we can do. And if there's one thing I don't want, it's I don't want to be long. So I'm happy to leave the ball a little bit short because we've got a makeable putt. But if we're looking at potentially being above the hole, that's not a putt that I want in any way, shape or form. So again, there's a lot of interest you can add to a green without loads of crazy slopes. You've got 2 big features on this green that I think definitely add to it. You definitely don't want to be adding any more to an Eden green than this. It just needs that one simple concept done very, very well. So going back to the Eden, how do you put a spin on this? Well, we're going to look at now 18 on Kaiuma Bay, which was my World Cup course from a couple of years ago, and I tried to put a spin on lots of the templates. And with this one, I made the Eden into a par 4 green complex. And part of the reason why I did that was because I believe that it allowed you to get some different angles to work at different pins. Same concept, you still got the Eden bunker long, you've got the hill on the left, and then right, rather than a strath, we've got a little river that's coming into play. Now in reality, how does this work? Well, you have a tee shot to relatively receptive fairway. You can play close to the bunker for better angles into that left-hand pin, or in this case we've got a short middle-ish sort of pin. So we can take it pretty much down the middle and should be absolutely fine. But where I really liked this green complex was what you ended up with on the second shot. So again, remember the concept of the hole was always, can you leave the ball below the hole? You've got a green that is quite deep, so we're looking at 14 feet at the front down and 10 at the back, so 4 feet of elevation change between back and front. And the more we're leaving the ball above the pin, the nastier a putt we've got down. So I felt this made for a really good closer where it's encouraging you to take on some of the danger. But then you start thinking, well, if you're going to try to leave it short, well, your miss is short and right, going to be really severely punished. Miss left and you've got that bunker. There's a couple of little slopes to feed it off as well, but you've got to be really taking on attempting to leave it short of this pin, which brings a lot of the trouble into play. And I felt that made for a really interesting closer. Is it a naturally like perfect Eden? Far from it, but you'll see that I use this concept quite a lot on other holes, and how you can take the kind of base concept of the template and push it and make it a really interesting hole design elsewhere. We fast forward 1 year later and you look at Strathlorne and you've got the same concept deployed again on a different par of hole. So 13 was one that I ripped up and redid a number of times because I just wasn't happy with the green complex. Originally it was a sort of punch bowl down here, then it became hidden behind a mound over here. What really I needed to happen was have a short par 5 that still had some bite, and also incorporated the river in a different way. Now we've still got the same thing, hard back to front green. 2 feet doesn't sound like a lot, but over this depth of hole it's pretty huge, and you don't want to be leaving the ball high on this green. So therefore that distance control on your second shot, if you're going for a par 5 in 2, you want to be putting some pressure on the approach shot and not just make it automatic. And particularly when in this game, if you had the tailwind with you and were easily clearing the water, you maybe hit to 330 and you're hitting in like, I don't know, 6 iron. It's not much into a par 3, so you've got to make that a really tricky shot. By doing this and making it so that for front pins, you'll notice these two in particular, you have to leave the ball below the hole. Well, this gets a lot more interesting as to how you manage that shot. What I felt, again, tried to do with this was how can you then generate angles on the same hole? Well, if you're just clearing the water, if you note kind of your yards to tee up here, and we'll go from like net shortest point, you can see it's a diagonal hazard, so the further left you go, 299 is out of the reach of any driver down unless downwind. So the further left you go, the less this bunker is coming into play, the more likely you can be to land it a bit short and roll it on, and therefore leave it short of a pin. Apart from this pin was always going to be a bit nastier, but then you've got this slope to slow it up a little bit if you're coming from the left. So all of the advantage was, can you hit it to here? If you're clearing and going over this side, you're facing going over this bunker, trying to stop it short of this pin, and you're likely leaving a really dicey putt that's down 0.7 feet and then just continuing running on. So that was the concept on this hole. Same thing, but a bit of a kind of combination of two templates. And we'll come back to this hole later in the series because there's another template hidden in this one that you may not recognise. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight into the Eden, how you might be able to use it in your own designs. It's a really flexible and interesting par 3 that poses one very straightforward question of can you leave the ball below the hole, but it's not an easy question to answer, and it really does do something that other par 3s don't. It doesn't require on very flashy green slopes or bunkering, just one simple idea done very well, and there's almost always a place on a course for that. So it generally is a great par 3 to fit in when you're looking for a 4th or a 5th amongst your others. I hope that was useful, and as ever, see you again soon.